Welcome to the podcast, Short Talks.
Imagine buying like a super premium gym membership.
Yeah.
You know, you walk in on your very first day, you put on your expensive new workout gear.
Yeah, maybe snap a couple of selfies for social media.
Oh, absolutely. You have to get the selfies. But then, after that, you just sit on a bench in the corner for an hour doing absolutely nothing.
Just scrolling on your phone.
Right. And I mean, if you did that every single Sunday, would you really call yourself an athlete? Probably not, right?
No, definitely not.
Well, today, for you listening, we are looking at an ancient theological text that suggests modern, spiritual but not religious believers might actually be doing the exact equivalent of just sitting on that bench.
It's honestly a profound disruption of how most people view faith today. I mean, we live in an era that really prizes absolute autonomy.
Oh, yeah, completely.
People tend to curate their spirituality like a custom playlist, A little meditation here, maybe favorite podcast there.
A nice walk in nature.
Exactly. It is heavily individualized. But the framework we are exploring today completely shatters that whole model.
And that is really the mission for this deep dive. We are going to unpack that incredibly common modern mindset. The whole, I'm spiritual, I believe in God, but I don't need organized religion thing.
Right, which is everywhere right now.
It really is. So we're contrasting that solitary approach with a pretty hard-hitting counter-argument from an ancient tradition. Our source today is a specific article by Metropolitan Constantinos of Singapore.
Yeah, and it's titled, Why Must I Go to Church? Can I be a good Christian without the services and Holy Communion?
But before we get into the mechanisms of that argument, let's establish a clear baseline here.
Yes, very important. As always, this deep dive is an impartial exploration. We are looking specifically at Orthodox Christian theology as it's presented in this particular article.
Right, so we aren't taking a side.
Exactly. Our goal isn't to take a side, and we are certainly not endorsing these theological views as absolute truth for you, the listener. We just want to analyze this fascinating framework of thought.
And really convey the exact arguments presented in the original text.
Precisely, because it challenges our modern assumptions about individualism in such a systemic, foundational way.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to even begin to understand this ancient perspective, we basically have to throw away our modern Western idea of what a church actually is.
Yeah, completely toss it out.
Because for most of us, that word conjures up a building, right? You think of walls, a roof, maybe some stained glass.
A physical location you drive to once a week.
Exactly. But the author dismantles that architectural definition almost immediately, doesn't he?
He really does. In this theological framework, you have to shift your thinking from a physical location to a biological necessity.
A biological necessity, that's a huge shift.
Right. The church is not conceived of as a place you just visit. It is a living, breathing organism that you are organically grafted into.
And the text points back to the Apostle Paul's letter to the Corinthians for this, where he describes the church as the body of Christ.
Yes.
And what's interesting is this isn't just poetic language or, a nice metaphor for a social club. It is treated as a literal theological reality.
Which fundamentally changes the stakes. The article brings in a warning from St. Ignatius the God-bearer.
Oh, way back in the 2nd century, right?
Exactly, writing to early Christian communities. And he gave a very stark warning. He basically said that separating yourself from the physical gathering of the church means separating yourself from God entirely.
Wow, that is intense.
It is. But crucially, he argues this isn't some punitive measure. It's not that God is this angry boss taking attendance and, punishing you for skipping a Sunday meeting.
Right, docking your spiritual pay.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Right.
because life in this tradition is inherently corporate. It is a shared biological reality.
Okay, let me push back on that biological metaphor for a second, just to play devil's advocate.
Sure, go for it.
So the author brings up the idea of a severed hand to describe the solo believer, basically arguing that trying to be a Christian without the church is like a hand cut off from a body.
Right.
But if a hand is cut off,
Right.
isn't it still structurally a hand? It has fingers, it has bones.
I see where you're going.
The author also uses this analogy of someone saying, I love the sea, but I don't want to get into the water. And I'm thinking, well, you can genuinely love the ocean from the safety of the beach.
What's fascinating here is how the ancient theology addresses that exact modern instinct. Because in this framework, a severed hand is not an independent hand.
Okay.
It's not just a smaller, self-sufficient version of a hand doing its own thing. Once it is severed from the body, It is a dead hand.
Oh.
That's grim.
Yeah, I mean, it might look like a hand for a little while, but decay is absolutely inevitable.
Because it loses the blood flow.
Precisely. It has been completely severed from its life source. The central argument is that the grace of God flows through the corporate body.
So it's not just about proximity. No. So, loving the sea from the beach is a nice sentiment. But in this theology, you aren't just observing the water as a spectator. You need the water to breathe.
It's like you're a fish, basically.
Exactly like a fish. You cannot be a living member of an organism if you refuse to participate in the biological functions that keep that very organism alive.
Okay, that makes sense. So if we accept that the church isn't a building but a literal biological organism, that creates an immediate physical problem, right?
It sure does.
Because organisms expend energy, and if they don't ingest calories to replace that energy, they die. So how does this theological body eat?
And that brings us to what is probably the most visceral part of the text, the Eucharist or Holy Communion.
Right.
If the church is a living body, it requires actual sustenance. The article leans heavily on Christ's own words to explain this mechanism.
Those words are pretty uncompromising.
Very. Christ states, "Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in yourselves."
And the author emphasizes that there is absolutely zero room for a symbolic interpretation of that sentence.
None at all. I mean, in Western thought, there's often this strict divide between spirit and matter, right?
Yeah, definitely. The spiritual is pure, and physical matter is just this temporary shell.
Exactly. But in Orthodox theology, physical matter is entirely capable of bearing the divine. That is why the bread and wine are not viewed as mere symbols.
They aren't just a religious ritual designed to, jog your memory about historical events.
No. Going back to St. Ignatius, he famously called the Eucharist the medicine of immortality.
Medicine of immortality. Which, I mean, that makes it sound like an antidote you have to swallow to cure a terminal disease.
That's a great way to put it.
Not just a pleasant ceremony to make you feel peaceful on a Sunday morning.
Right. It is the literal food that unites the believer with the life of God. There's a 14th century writer, cited in the text, St. Nicholas Cabasilas.
Yeah, okay.
And he provides a very structural framework for how this works. He outlines that a Christian's life begins with baptism. It is then sealed with chrismation.
Let's just pause and define that real quick for the listener. Chrismation is a sacrament where a person is anointed with holy oil. It's considered the sealing of the Holy Spirit, right?
Correct. So baptism begins the life, chrismation seals it, but St. Nicholas Cabasilas argues that this life is only sustained and nourished through Holy Communion.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because bringing this back to that gym analogy from the very beginning.
Oh yeah, let's bring that back.
Baptism is basically paying the initiation fee and joining the gym. Chrismation is them handing you your official key fob so you actually have access to the building.
I love this.
Right. But if you never actually eat any protein and you never lift a single weight, which would be communion in this scenario, your muscles will still wither away.
Yes.
Your super premium gym membership cannot save you from starvation if you just refuse to eat.
That captures the stakes perfectly. The text really emphasizes that the Eucharist cannot be treated as an optional choice.
Which is how a lot of people view it today, honestly.
Absolutely. Modern spirituality often frames these ancient rituals as, extra credit. The assumption is that you can have a perfectly vibrant spiritual life purely in your mind.
And communion is just for those who want to be, extra pious or traditional.
Right. But this theology argues the exact opposite. Communion is the baseline requirement for spiritual survival. Without that physical nourishment, the soul ultimately starves.
Wow. Okay, so if we follow this biological logic further, bodies don't just eat, they also communicate and express themselves.
They do.
So if gathering physically is a biological requirement for taking communion, how does that alter the act of prayer? Because I feel like the most common objection we hear to organized religion is the person who says, well, I just pray alone in my bedroom.
Right. And if the gathering is biologically necessary, it changes the entire geometry of prayer. The author points out a really profound detail that's kind of hidden in plain sight.
Oh, what's that?
Christ taught his followers to pray, "Our Father." He deliberately did not teach them to pray, "My Father."
Oh, wow. The plurality is just baked right into the foundational language of the faith.
Exactly. It forces the believer, from the very first syllable, to acknowledge their siblinghood with everyone else in the body.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It is. Christ also gave the assurance that where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I. So in this tradition, The localized presence of God is intimately linked to the communal gathering.
The article actually quotes St. John Chrysostom here. He states that there is no Christian without the church, just as there is no soldier without an army.
Which is such a powerful image. A soldier standing completely alone on a battlefield, no matter how brave or well-trained they are, is just a casualty waiting to happen.
Yeah, it doesn't end well for the soldier.
No. The strength of the soldier comes from the phalanx, from the men standing on either side of him with their shields interlocked.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for the listener again, though.
Please do.
Because someone listening to this is undoubtedly thinking, but come on, I can sit in my own room, completely alone, and pray with the exact same intensity, focus, and sincerity as I would sitting next to a bunch of strangers in a pew. Why isn't that enough?
Well, the text actually validates that instinct to some degree. Private prayer is considered absolutely necessary. No early church father dismisses the value of praying alone in your room.
Oh, okay. That's a relief for the introverts.
Right. But the crucial distinction the text makes is why private prayer can never replace communal worship. Going back to the mechanism of the army, it's all about mutual support.
How so?
When you pray alone, you are relying entirely on your own spiritual energy, your own current mood, your own emotional reserves.
And those can deplete pretty fast.
Exactly. But in communal worship, prayer rises stronger because it is united. When your faith is weak on a given Sunday, you are literally carried by the faith of the person standing next to you.
Which introduces what might be the most challenging and honestly psychologically fascinating part of this entire deep dive.
I think I know where you're going.
Because gathering together physically isn't just about finding strength in numbers so you can pray louder. It's actually about the unavoidable, incredibly uncomfortable friction of dealing with other human beings.
The messy reality of human community.
Yes, the messy reality. The article draws a massive contrast between Western modernity and what it calls orthodox anthropology, meaning, how this ancient tradition defines what a human being actually is.
Right. Western modernity tells us that faith is pristine, internal, and entirely private. It's a closed loop between me and God.
But orthodox anthropology argues that humans are inherently relational beings. We are quite literally manufactured for communion, not for solitary self-sufficiency.
And this is where the theology becomes intensely practical. The text quotes St. Basil the Great from his ascetic discourses.
Oh, these questions are so good.
They are brilliant. He asks a series of rhetorical questions aimed directly at anyone trying to be a solo believer. He asks, if you live alone, whose feet will you wash? To whom will you show obedience? How will you ever be trained in patience toward the difficulties that living with others brings?
To put St. Basil into everyday terms for you listening, just think about living with a deeply messy roommate.
Oh, the worst.
Right. I mean, it is incredibly easy to feel like a perfectly patient, enlightened Zen master when you're sitting all alone in a quiet room with a scented candle.
Because there's literally no one there to interrupt your peace.
Exactly. But the very second your roommate leaves their dirty dishes in the sink for the 4th day in a row, or, I don't know, chews their food too loudly.
Suddenly your so-called patience is tested in reality.
Yes. You actually have to practice forgiveness. You can't just theorize about being a forgiving person.
And that is the deeper mechanism the author is exposing here. Without communal worship, you completely bypass the struggle of love in practice.
You opt out of the hard part.
You really do. When you curate your own private spiritual life, the very first thing you eliminate is friction. You avoid people you don't like or who annoy you.
Naturally, yeah.
But in this ancient tradition, those irritating people are the exact training ground for humility. The goal isn't just individual moral goodness. The goal is the union of all into one body.
And you just cannot achieve that union without the friction of dealing with actual flawed human beings.
You really can't.
So what does this all mean? Because avoiding that friction doesn't just stunt your personal growth.
Yeah.
According to this text, it leads to a much more insidious danger.
It does.
When you avoid the community, you basically end up making up your own theological rules entirely.
Yes, the immense danger of DIY religion.
DIY religion.
Human psychology naturally avoids cognitive dissonance, right? We want our beliefs to validate how we already live. So when you isolate yourself from a historical community, you run this massive risk of self-justification.
Oh, for sure.
You end up tailoring your faith to your own measure, constructing a belief system that perfectly aligns with your existing political views, your social preferences, and your own comfort zones.
Because there is no physical community standing there to tell you that you might actually be wrong. Everyone just becomes their own personal theologian.
Which is a very dangerous place to be, according to this text. You shape a faith to your own taste, but you do it entirely devoid of correction.
You lose the guardrails.
Exactly. You lose the guardrails offered by communal experience, the historical teachings of the fathers, and the physical sacraments.
This DIY religion essentially functions as a giant intellectual echo chamber. It's the equivalent of grading your own homework.
That's exactly what it is.
I mean, you are absolutely guaranteed to get an A+ every single time because you are the one who wrote the grading rubric.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains a very stern statement from St. Cyprian of Carthage that the author includes.
Oh, this quote is intense.
St. Cyprian famously said, "Whoever does not have the church as mother cannot have God as father."
That is a heavy, completely uncompromising statement.
It is, but it reveals the core mechanism of this tradition.
Yeah.
Your relationship with God cannot be a direct, unmediated, isolated line.
It has to go through the community.
It must be mediated through the body of the church, precisely to prevent this exact kind of isolated delusion and self-justification. The physical community acts as an anchor.
Keeping you grounded in reality.
Yes, a reality that is larger and often much more demanding than your own internal thoughts.
Which leads us to a really fascinating transition. Because if the messy physical community is what prevents you from falling into the delusion of DIY religion, how does the ancient church actively pull you out of your own head?
That's the big question.
And it does it through the physical space and the rituals themselves. The liturgy provides the ultimate counter-environment to our modern isolation.
The text refers to the services as a school of holiness. It argues that liturgy is not just a checklist of religious obligations you sit through, checking your watch.
Right.
It is an immersive spiritual pedagogy. The services are actively designed to shape your experience of time, your physical senses, and even your language.
It's a full-body experience. The author details the hymns, the specific readings, the physical movements, kneeling down, making the sign of the cross, standing up.
Engaging every sense?
Exactly. The smell of the incense hitting your nose, the visual light of the beeswax candles. It is this intense sensory environment that bypasses the purely rational brain and trains the body and the soul simultaneously.
And private prayer in a bedroom simply cannot offer that multisensory communal training.
It's like reading a movie script in your bedroom versus acting in an IMAX blockbuster with surround sound.
That's a great comparison.
Uh-huh.
The text brings in St. Maximus the Confessor, who wrote a profound work called Mystagogia.
And he had a really unique view on the liturgy, right?
He did. He describes the divine liturgy not as a mere gathering of people, but as a cosmic action. It is an image of the entire world, a localized point where heaven literally meets earth, and where the timeless breaks into our chronological time.
I read that and thought it sounds less like going to a movie theater to watch a screen and more like stepping into a foreign embassy.
A foreign embassy? How do you mean?
Well, when you step into a foreign embassy, you are physically still located in your home city. But legally, operationally, and atmospherically, you have stepped onto foreign soil. The liturgy, in this theology, acts as a localized embassy of heaven.
That is a brilliant way to frame St. Maximus's theology. The liturgy is an embassy where the laws of a totally different kingdom apply.
Yeah.
And this really wraps up the author's answer to the foundational question of the entire article. Salvation in this Orthodox framework is not a philosophical theory to be studied privately.
It's a life.
It is a life to be lived together. It is nourished by the physical encounter of the liturgy, by the tangible sacraments, and as we said, by the frustrating, beautiful reality of the community.
It is a massive paradigm shift. For you listening, just think about the sheer distance between this ancient view and our modern habits.
It's staggering.
We started this deep dive by talking about faith as a solitary possession, right? A custom Spotify playlist you curate exclusively for your own enjoyment.
Yep.
But this text argues for faith as a shared corporeal Eucharistic journey. You cannot be a living member of a body without participating in its biological functions, and you cannot survive without the physical food that is offered.
This raises an important question, and it is something for our listeners to deeply consider as we close.
I'd love to hear it.
We live in a hyper-modern, hyper-individualized society, and we are currently facing an unprecedented, well-documented global epidemic of loneliness, anxiety, and just deep isolation.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere.
So building entirely on this ancient text's focus on relational anthropology, this fundamental idea that we are quite literally made for communion, Could this ancient, seemingly rigid requirement of showing up in person be exactly what we need?
Oh,
In a world that tells us we can do everything remotely and privately, could the demand to deal with irritating people and share a physical, communal ritual be the exact antidote the modern human psyche is craving?
that's a profound thought.
Right. Even if you step entirely outside the bounds of theology, is there a psychological and social cure in this ancient requirement to just gather?
That's a phenomenal thought to leave on. Are we starving ourselves by trying to do it all alone in our heads? Maybe it's time to take off the noise-canceling headphones, delete the custom playlist, and actually join the band. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey today. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we will see you on the next deep dive.
Thank you very much for your time. See you soon.